James Garner was the kind of Hollywood star you don't hear about anymore. No scandals, no ego trips, no drama. Just a grounded, principled man who built his legacy on real talent, quiet charm, and a rock-solid moral compass. But even a calm, steady presence like Garner had his limits. And when it came to working with Steve McQueen, he finally reached a breaking point. For years, fans assumed Garner and McQueen were friendly co-stars on The Great Escape, one of the most celebrated war films of the 1960s. But behind the camera, a very different story was unfolding, a story of rivalry, ego, insecurity, and personal tension that pushed even the unshakable James Garner to speak out. He never went public at the time. He didn't rant in interviews or blast McQueen on talk shows. But years later, in his memoir, The Garner Files, he finally opened up. He revealed what filming with McQueen was really like, and why the experience stayed with him long after the movie wrapped. He admitted McQueen was a pain in the neck, but that was only part of the truth. The full story shows how one of Hollywood's coolest icons became, in Garner's eyes, one of the most difficult co-stars he ever had to work with. And once you hear what happened, you may never see The Great Escape the same way again. When filming began in 1962, Steve McQueen was already rising fast. Hollywood's ultimate tough guy, the rebel, the lone wolf, the star who didn't need dialogue to dominate a scene. Audiences loved his intensity. They loved the motorcycle rides, the stunts, the raw masculinity that set him apart from everyone else. But behind that cool exterior was a deep insecurity that surfaced whenever McQueen felt threatened. And when James Garner joined the cast, McQueen didn't see him as a partner. He saw him as competition. Garner wasn't trying to outshine anyone. He was famously easygoing professional, generous, and relaxed. Yet that effortless charm made him magnetic. While McQueen fought for the spotlight, Garner attracted it naturally. His character, Flight Lieutenant Hendley, wasn't flashy, but his warmth and humanity made him unforgettable. And McQueen noticed. Quickly before long, the tension started to simmer. McQueen began pushing director John Sturges for more screen time, more heroic moments, more rewrites, anything to make his character look bigger, tougher, braver. One of the most famous scenes in the entire film, the legendary motorcycle chase, wasn't even in the original script. It was added to satisfy McQueen's demands. And yes, it became iconic. But behind that thrilling set piece was a man, desperate to protect his status. McQueen wasn't just fighting for a better role. He was fighting to stay in control. And he couldn't do that with James Garner quietly stealing the spotlight without even trying. Meanwhile, Garner just kept doing the work, showing up on time, treating everyone with respect, never asking for special treatment. He didn't isolate himself. He didn't put on airs. He didn't try to win the set. And ironically, that's exactly what made McQueen more anxious. The cast and crew felt the strain. There was no blow-up, no physical confrontation, but the tension was constant, hanging in the air, impossible to ignore. And as filming went on, it became obvious this was more than a clash between actors. It was a clash between two very different men. Years later, Garner finally told the truth. In The Garner Files, he described McQueen as trouble, said McQueen could be warm and friendly one moment, cold and distant the next. He said McQueen always had something to prove, and that he treated almost everyone as a rival co-stars, directors, even friends. Garner wasn't bitter. He wasn't trying to tear McQueen down. He was simply being honest. He believed McQueen had built his entire image around being the mysterious loner. But underneath that cool exterior was someone far more complicated. Someone who craved approval but couldn't share the spotlight. Someone who saw every talented actor as a threat. And that insecurity didn't stop when the camera stopped rolling. It lingered, affecting relationships, friendships, and eventually, the legacy of one of Hollywood's most iconic stars. During the filming of The Great Escape, McQueen crossed a line James Garner never forgot. Out of nowhere, he confronted Garner with a shocking accusation that Garner was secretly having an affair with McQueen's wife, actress Neil Adams. Garner was stunned. Not only was the accusation false, it came completely out of left field. There was no flirtation, no private conversations, nothing even remotely questionable. It was pure paranoia, and Garner knew it. He later said he recognized the moment for what it was, a glimpse into McQueen's deep insecurities. Instead of arguing or throwing the accusation back at him, Garner simply walked away. But the wound lingered. It wasn't just an insult to his character, it was personal. What made the moment even more revealing was what happened later. Neil Adams herself confided in Garner, telling him how McQueen struggled with jealousy and trust, how he would imagine betrayal even when nothing was wrong. Garner didn't judge her, didn't brag, didn't retaliate. He just understood. Behind McQueen's cool, untouchable public image was a man terrified of being abandoned, overshadowed, or outdone. Garner wasn't a saint. He had flaws like anyone else. But what made him different was his ability to see the deeper truth. McQueen's resentment wasn't really about Garner. It was about McQueen's own fear of being second best. Garner hoped they might eventually move past it, maybe even become friends. But that never happened. The distance between them stayed permanent, and by the time filming wrapped, it was clear they'd never be close. And McQueen wasn't the only co-star whose behavior pushed Garner's patience. Another Hollywood legend would take things even further this time, not with words, but with something dangerously close to violence. If McQueen was a quiet storm, Charles Bronson was thunder waiting to strike. Tough on screen and often just as imposing off it, Bronson didn't let people get too close. But when his pride collided with Garner's sense of fairness, sparks flew inside Garner's own home. During the production of The Great Escape, Garner liked to host poker nights to give the cast and crew a break from the intense filming. It was simple, friendly, no-pressure fun. But one evening, everything changed. A struggling Hollywood, extra clearly intimidated but excited to be included, managed to win a hand against Charles Bronson. The pot wasn't large, but the win was significant for the young actor. When the cards were laid down, everyone expected Bronson to slide the chips across the table. Instead, he refused. No explanation, no joke. Just a cold stare, arms crossed, not budging an inch. At first people laughed, thinking Bronson was teasing, but the silence that followed made it clear he wasn't joking. The extra froze, unsure how to respond. The room tensed, and that's when James Garner stepped in. Calmly, without raising his voice or embarrassing anyone, he told Bronson he needed to pay up. Not because of the money, but because it was the right thing to do. Bronson fired back with attitude. The tension snapped. Voices tightened. The atmosphere shifted from friendly to dangerous in a heartbeat. Voices rose. Tension thickened, and for a split second, it looked like fists were about to fly across the poker table. But James Garner didn't flinch. He held his ground with that calm, steady presence everyone on set had come to respect. And eventually, Charles Bronson gave in. He paid the bet. The moment passed, but the tension didn't. Whatever sparked between them that night didn't burn. Out it lingered for years. They barely spoke after that. And when they finally crossed paths again, years later in a restaurant, nothing had changed. No greeting, no small talk, just a heavy, unspoken silence between two men who shared unfinished business and zero desire to resolve it. Garner didn't look back on the confrontation with pride. He didn't see himself as the tough guy who put Bronson in his place. To him, it was simple. Ego, left unchecked, turns even the strongest men into bullies. And he wasn't about to let someone intimidate a kid who didn't deserve it. That moment wasn't the only time Garner stood firm. He stood up to co-stars, studios, contracts, and even his own body when it started breaking down after years of stunts and physical work. The next chapter of his life was quieter, but in many ways it revealed more about who he really was. Garner never thought of himself as a legend. He was just a working actor trying to do things the right way in his memoir. He opened up about the toll decades in Hollywood took on him. The injuries from doing his own stunts didn't fade. They followed him for the rest of his life. He fought multiple legal battles with major studios. He won not because he wanted revenge or publicity, but because fairness mattered to him. He believed in standing up for what was right, even when it meant going against powerful people. And when it came to Steve McQueen, Garner didn't carry bitterness. Instead, he saw a man driven by insecurity rather than malice, a man terrified of being forgotten or overshadowed. Garner didn't excuse the behavior, but he understood it. He saw past the tough exterior to the fear underneath. That was James Garner's real strength. He didn't need to act tough or protect an image. He was honest, humble, human.